Hello, Jenna, and welcome to the FINITE Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Very excited to be talking all things ABM, I guess, particularly getting buy-in, which I know is a big challenge for a lot of teams getting started on the ABM journey. So we're going to be diving into that. Before we do, I'll let you tell us a bit about your background and experience. And I know you've done all sorts of interesting roles covering both kind of agency side and technology platform side. So yeah, tell us a bit about your story to date.
Yeah, well, I think I've got what can be probably politely called a portfolio career. It's been a bit scattergun, really, to be honest. And I think that probably came because I kind of fell into marketing. It wasn't really what I set out to do. So kind of a temp role after uni that was meant to just be a bit of filing for a while ended up turning into kind of a comms role, which then turned into a marketing role. And then once I got into that, I thought, this is amazing. I love this. That kind of led on to graphic design for a while, and then ended up in-house doing a product marketing role, but really, the whole marketing team was called product marketing. So it was all facets of marketing for about 4 years in a B2B company selling operational excellence software. And that was where I really sort of got bitten by the B2B bug, which I think is a really odd thing to say because people see that as kind of the less interesting side of marketing. But for me, it's more interesting because it's more difficult to get people emotionally excited about those products. So we've got to work even harder and kind of work better as marketers to get our buyers engaged beyond just sort of ticking an RFP box. And then I moved agency side for a couple of years, so leading client services teams. And then the last couple of years, I've moved vendor side. So I feel like I've been kind of like all 3 points of the triangle now, vendor side managing our agency relationships. And that's where I am today at Terminus. So I head up our EMEA Partnerships team looking after our agencies. And yeah, so I've been here for about 6 months now.
Cool. And tell us more about Terminus. And I guess it's always interesting to hear a bit about the marketing team structure. We always like to dive into how marketing happens at the organizations that we have our guests from.
Yeah, so it's a funny one because I'm in the partner team. Like, I think some places see partnerships as a channel for more sales, which it absolutely is. Obviously at the end of the day, we're trying to reach our partners' clients and work with them if they've got ABM requirements. But I always see partnerships as sitting somewhere between sales, marketing, customer success. Because if you're not influencing all of those and you're not working with all of those teams, then you're not going to get true partnership with your agencies. So the way we're set up, we have got a global team based out of Atlanta. So this is the marketing team. They're global, they're based out of Atlanta, and they're running, obviously, ABM, as you might imagine, because we're an ABM vendor, both for existing clients and for net new acquisition. I think we'll probably end up touching on the difference between those two later on the podcast, as well as demand gen, brand awareness, thought leadership. They're really good at driving a lot around employee engagement and personal branding, kind of supporting individuals like me who come onto podcasts and webinars and things, and some other members of the team who are more comfortable out there in front of the camera. The marketing team are really all about empowering us to go out and do that and kind of be spokespeople for the company.
Very cool. And I think this is a great opportunity to talk about getting started with ABM, how to get the ball rolling. I think ABM's just been such a growing topic for us at FINITE and within the community. I know, we've approached it from so many angles, but I think that the challenge we often hear is how do we get started? And it can be a big and feel like a big cumbersome uphill battle, I guess, when you're starting at the beginning of the journey. I think we're seeing more and more B2B tech companies heading in the ABM direction, even if it's kind of, I think, enabled by products like Terminus, making it easier in a lot of ways. But it's always great to hear from the experts as to how to get going. So I guess as a starting point, maybe you can talk a bit about why you think it is a challenge for ABM advocates to start getting internal buy-in for an ABM program.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I think I don't know too many B2B companies these days that are, if not started on an ABM journey, then at least thinking about it. I think it's sort of become one of those things that's a bit table stakes. but it's a phrase that's bandied about. Not everybody understands it in quite the same way. And I think some people who maybe think that they've started it maybe haven't really properly. And I certainly haven't spoken to many people who've said we've absolutely got this nailed. I think we're all as an industry on this learning curve together. So we call it ABM. We don't all have the same understanding of what that is, but that stands for account-based marketing. And having marketing in the title, I think, really doesn't help with getting internal buy-in. So if you've got a company who's not used to ABM, they don't have any experience with it, then actually it sounds like the latest marketing trend. And it sounds like a campaign or a new way of doing marketing. And it's something like, oh yeah, that's nice, carry on marketing, do your thing, but it's your thing to do. I think the phrase ABX, so like account-based experiences, is coming more and more to the fore, but it hasn't quite caught on yet. It hasn't really become the de facto. But I think if we can start to see ABM as ABX and start to talk about account-based experiences, then that lets us build on all the great work that we did with customer experience. Because we don't want to. It's not like a next phase. We don't want to forget everything we did around customer experience. So all the great work we did around that, all the learnings that we got from that, take that and hone it to be account specific. And if that's the way that the organization sees it, then all of a sudden everybody can see the role that they play, and it becomes less about something that marketing's trying to do and trying to persuade them to get on board with, and it's much more about how the company operates. Which is kind of the other stumbling block, I think, is if you're doing proper ABM, it is a corporate strategy. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't done ABM before, it's a hell of an ask to go to the C-suite and ask them to go and basically change the way that they run their business. So there needs to be some sort of, maturity curve, some sort of laddering to get you from where you are today to kind of full ABM, because there's no way anybody can do that immediately themselves. We've got this concept of crawl, walk, run, and whatever way you define that yourself, kind of give yourself stepping stones and take the business on a journey with you, and don't just suddenly try and get people to change the way the company runs overnight, because that's going to be tricky.
Absolutely, yeah. When I hear you say that, it makes me think, actually, I think as marketers, we're often tasked with projects which end up rippling through organizations much more widely than we think. I mean, anyone that's been involved in a brand project or a website project or anything, any kind of what feels like initially can be a fairly tight fit marketing project suddenly becomes, the CEO rethinking the company values, and that trickles down across everything, not just the brand and the website. So, I think it's not unusual in the marketing world.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I read an article maybe about a year ago, and I really wish I could remember who it was by. But the article was about how more and more CMOs are becoming CEOs because of the changing role of marketing. So exactly what you've spoken about there, the fact that marketing quite often needs to lead the charge in terms of a different way of looking at things or a different way of doing things across the business. Actually, they're one of the few departments that has to get every single internal stakeholder bought into a new vision and take them in that direction. And actually, what great skills for a CEO to have. So it's interesting that you've picked up on that as well.
Yeah, definitely see it more and more. And I guess being agency side, with my agency hat on the rest of the time, see it from that perspective too, just delivering projects and seeing some of the challenges and I guess sometimes delays and slowdowns for things to take effect, because the projects end up growing into more than maybe people thought they were when they first kicked off. So yeah, interesting. And I think definitely hear the same on the ABM side of things. So I guess with that in mind, where is the best starting point, do you think, for someone getting going with ABM?
I think there's probably not one definitive answer. It would be easy, right? Everybody would be doing ABM if it was a case of, here's the playbook, just go off and run this and you're fine. It will depend on what you're currently doing, how you're currently going to market, what it is you're trying to change. So what's not working with what you're doing today, and why are you moving towards an account-centric approach? What do you think it's going to do for the business? But that's a bit of a cop-out answer, so I don't want to give you no answer. But personally, I think I'm a massive fan of starting ABM with existing clients. So I think the reason for that is you have already got a relationship with those clients. You're not grappling to sort of get in touch with them, trying to figure out their contact details and try and find out how you can get your message in front of them. You've already got that open, live line of communication. So I think it's kind of path of least resistance. Especially if you have a good relationship with those clients, you've also got a bit of trust. So you can almost get things a bit wrong. So I think it's quite a good test bed for your ABM programs. So almost like hone your craft with your existing clients, figure out what works and what doesn't work from an ABM perspective, maybe where you spent too much money the first time or what really didn't resonate particularly well, and then start to then build that backwards towards your net new acquisition. So what that would look like is, rather than the usual kind of, well, we've got a fortnightly check-in, we do a QBR, and every time we run an event or a webinar or release a bit of content, we send out to you. Move away from that almost generic nurture of existing clients and start to make that account-centric. So don't now assume, I guess, that you know everything about them just because they're your client. So continue to do desk research on them, read their annual reports, look at what their key stakeholders are saying across LinkedIn, look at intent data. If they start to show intent towards, say, renewal time on your competitors, then maybe that's a sign that they're looking elsewhere, and you need to dig deeper and kind of get under the surface of what they've told you so far. Like, are they actually happy, and are they genuinely going to renew? See what they're doing on your website, how they're engaging with your emails, etc., and not only get close to the retention piece with that ABM, but also look at cross and upsell opportunities. So again, don't assume, oh, it's a QBR, so now I'm going to try and push the next product or service on them. Talk to them about that when it's right for them. And you can only really do that through not only the one-on-one conversations you have with them, but by continuing to do account-centric activities in the background as well. And I think that, to me, that's the best possible place to start. That's true ABM. So you're really, practicing your craft before you go and spend, because it is more expensive, obviously, with net new. So yeah, that's where I would start.
Interesting. And as you say, that is, I guess, ABM purists would say that is almost the only form of ABM sometimes. I think there's sometimes debate around whether ABM is a net new acquisition approach or is it purely growing existing account. And I guess the origins of it probably called something else, but working with massive, if you had a huge account with an IBM or a Microsoft or those kind of organizations, there's a lot of room for growth, and that's how it started. And maybe technology's enabled it to become more of a net new acquisition tool as well. But do you think is it worth being clear on kind of the difference between the two? Because as you say, I guess there's quite different approaches. Net new is more expensive. I guess we see businesses using it, ABM effectively for both, but I guess I'm trying to think what the actual question is I'm asking you, but maybe it's do you agree with some of the purists that say ABM should only be used for existing accounts and it's not a net new approach?
No, in a nutshell, I don't. Only because I myself have used it. So, before I ever worked at Terminus, when I was in-house, I was doing ABM. So to the point that you were saying about, was it called something else? We were, what did we call it? I think it was like strategic key account pursuits or, something like that. That when the phrase ABM came up, I thought to myself, oh, there's this new thing that I'm going to have to learn as a marketer. And once I dug into it and I understood the fundamentals, I was like, oh, it's the same thing we've been doing. We've just called it a new name. And then, I've obviously run ABM programs when I was agency side, and I've just seen the effectiveness of it. And I think, yes, maybe that's where it started. And 100%, I think that you should use it with your existing clients to kind of retain and grow accounts. But I think you'd be missing a really big trick if you weren't using ABM for net new acquisition, because what's the alternative? What are you going to do? Continue to just spray and pray and spend media and hope for the best? Like that wasn't working. There's a reason that we've moved to a different way of doing things. Yeah,
makes sense. I think something that comes up a lot when we've talked ABM, we've had panel events, we've had all sorts of ABM related topics through FINITE events in the past. The pilot scheme always comes up as a potential solution to getting started with ABM. I guess, a pilot can mean many different things in itself, but as a broad question, how do you feel about a pilot to get started with ABM?
It does mean very different things, Alex, and that's where I have a problem with it. So I've got a real love-hate relationship with pilots because I completely understand that you're not going to suddenly change how you go to market overnight. Like, you need to try something first, make sure it works, test it, and then grow from a solid baseline. I entirely get that. I think the problem I've always had with pilots is clients coming to me and saying, we want to dip our toe into ABM, we want to do a pilot. And what it really transpires is they've got 3 months and, you know, like a tenth of the budget they would normally have. And then they want to try ABM, but they're not giving it a proper shot at all. And then it's never going to work because it is a longer term, it's a strategic program. It's not, you know, a quick lead gen campaign. So if everybody's got the same understanding of what the pilot is, then I think it's absolutely fine. I think, you know, if you're using ABM, you're probably trying to win deals that are, you know, 20, 30K plus, and your sales cycles are probably at least 4 to 6 months. So realistically, you probably don't want your pilot to be any less than 12 months because are you really going to see the impact? Probably not. And that tends to scare some people. They're like, what, a year's pilot? But actually, yeah, because anything shorter, what are you really going to show? But you can kind of contain it in different ways. So that doesn't mean that for a year you have to run your whole go-to-market differently. You know, you can constrain it to maybe one vertical or one region or one product line, and use that as your test bed. But I think for the pilot to be effective, you need to have baselined and benchmarked properly first. So you need to know what it is that you're comparing with. And then you need the senior stakeholders to have bought into those benchmarks and bought into the metrics that you're going to measure the pilot by. I think where I've seen it go wrong is maybe somebody senior in marketing has gone off and done a pilot, and then once the pilot's done and the results are in, they've then taken that up to the C-suite and said, okay, we did this pilot, look, it works, but they were never bought into it, they weren't ready for it, and therefore it kind of almost doesn't matter what the metrics are because they weren't on that journey. So get your senior stakeholders bought in early, get them to agree to the metrics that you're going to be measured against, and then run your ABM pilot at that point.
I think that's really good advice, and particularly the managing expectations around timelines as well, because I think, as you say, most B2B sales journeys are 3-6 months minimum, and if you're going to set a pilot for 3 or 6 months, you're not going to have time for it to really take effect. So yeah, an obvious point actually when you say it, but I think one that maybe a lot of people don't think enough about. And as you say, probably trying to frame a 12-month pilot to anybody might feel tough, because I think 12 months doesn't feel like 12 months feels like more than a pilot, whichever way you cut it. It's potentially a fairly big commitment. So yeah, good to be realistic and manage those expectations early on for sure. What about the investment needed into getting started with ABM? And I feel like talking about budgets and spend on any marketing activity is always going to be a bit finger in the air, and without a specific brief and target set and everything else, it's the answer could be anything. But how do you look at getting started with ABM from a kind of defining budgets and spend perspective?
Yeah, I think you're right. And having worked in agencies, I think we both know this, right? Is sometimes without a full and clear brief, you're expected to have a figure to hand. But I think there's probably like a really good way to look at this, which is don't shortchange your pilot. So don't invest a tiny percentage of what you would normally invest in either the region or the vertical, or, you know, whatever you've decided to pilot on, because it is really, really easy to spend loads of time doing the desk research, understanding the company, identifying the accounts, you know, prioritizing them, segmenting them, creating content around them. And then at the very last hurdle, you don't spend on the media, because, you know, those other things, if you're doing those in-house, you can do those relatively cheaply. Like, of course, there's an opportunity cost of what could people be working on otherwise. But in terms of actually hard cash, that can be done quite cheaply. And then they don't want to spend on the media. So all that great work, all that great content, all those messages only ever get seen by your internal marketing department. And they don't actually get in front of the clients, because especially if it's net new acquisition, they don't know you already. Probably you're probably not engaged in an active dialogue with them, so you need to use media spend to get in front of them. So I think maybe some line items, I guess, that I would look at would be, what would you normally spend media-wise on this segment? What are you going to have to do content creation-wise? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go off and, kind of build some big, heavy white paper for each account. You could use existing content, kind of top and tail it, tweak it slightly, depending on what the research has showed you. So that doesn't have to be massive investment. But the other thing that I would seriously consider if I was doing an ABM pilot is, do I go to an agency for help? Because whilst that is expensive, quote unquote, for a pilot, there's a reason agencies are experts in what they do. They've done this time and time and time again for clients. They've already learned the lessons. Somebody else paid for those lessons to be learned, and you can benefit from all of that, and you can fast track a whole bunch of mistakes and, skip past them. So actually, yes, it's an outlay, but I think it's such a good investment of your budget to go to the experts, especially if you use a company who've never run ABM before. You're going to be kind of fumbling around in the dark, and it's going to take longer. It's going to be more difficult. I would personally invest in going to an agency to get you at least off the ground and at least started and get the framework right.
Good advice. What about conversations elsewhere in the business beyond just sales and marketing? I mean, we'll probably talk a little bit about sales. It's impossible not to talk about sales and marketing alignment when we have an ABM discussion. But before we go there, like more widely than that, as you alluded to, these kind of programs can be organization wide. Where else should people be looking, and who else should they be kind of taking on the journey?
Well, I think given that we've already spoken about ABM for existing clients, I think it's vital to have customer success on board, especially if you're a SaaS company. Then obviously the senior leadership team are interested in that annual recurring revenue and how better to do that through retention and upsell of your existing clients. I think we've all heard that stat about attracting a brand new client being 5 times more expensive than winning business from an existing one. So I think customer success is vital. I also think the RevOps is really, really important. I think they're a team that quite often get overlooked from an ABM perspective. But RevOps are all about reliable forecasts, predictive pipelines, kind of using data to make business decisions. So actually they should be your best friends when it comes to trying to run ABM. So they're going to help you figure out the measurements for the campaign and what the metrics should be. They're going to help you baseline what you did before and kind of effectively measure and compare and contrast. And what they're also going to be great at is helping you spot patterns to see what's working and what's not working, as well as in the future, they're often a really good conduit into the CFO, and they're going to be able to help you build the business case for more and more investment as this starts to gain traction. So I would say that your gold dust, your sprinkling of gold dust for your ABM program is to get RevOps on side very, very quickly. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the C-suite. So make sure that they're bought in early. You don't want to be starting to do ABM on your own and then surprise them. Oh, by the way, we've been doing some ABM. It is effectively, as I said at the start, a new way of doing business. It's a corporate strategy. So you need to make sure that they're bought in. They're bought into the metrics. They're bought into what you're trying to do. They understand the timelines. They understand those kind of leading and lagging indicators. And they can be great advocates for kind of doing a top-down piece with their departments. When you need access and support from the wider company, you can have those senior leaders telling their teams and enabling their teams to help you and to support.
Let's talk about sales. We can't not talk about relationship with sales as marketers and talking about ABM. Sales and marketing alignment is probably second on the list after ABM of things that we talk about a lot at FINITE. I guess the two go hand in hand, but tell us a bit about your perspective, having seen so many different companies running ABM programs and the relationship with sales from a marketing angle.
Yeah, 100%. It's vital. If sales and marketing are not bought into ABM, then you're going to fail at the first hurdle. It's never going to get off the ground. They need to feel ownership of this as much as marketing do. And I entirely understand. I think the more and more ABM I've done in my career, the closer to sales that I've got, and the more I understand just how much pressure they're under. So how hard it is every week, every month, every quarter to be delivering against that number is very, very hard. And especially if they're up against it and you're like, oh, hey, let's go off in this direction. Let's do things differently. They're like, look, at least we know what we're doing today. Just let us do more of that and just leave it to us. So I think the best way to get them bought in was actually we published an article about how to get your boss bought into ABM not that long ago, but I actually think it's really applicable to sales, because there was a quote in it which said, and I am going to read it because I can't remember it verbatim, but it said, the best leads coming out of your ABM program are not marketing qualified, they're self-qualified. They've raised their hands out in the marketplace and identified themselves as potential advocates. There's just some work to do in getting them to the finish line. That's it. That is exactly why sales and marketing need to work together. This is no longer we do this bit, we do this bit. You've already together identified who's in the market, and now you need to work together as a team to bring them over the line. And that's a really good way to get sales to understand this new way of doing things.
Good advice. I think we should wrap up talking quickly about numbers and just kind of key metrics. It'd be great to have your perspective on what those metrics are that we're looking to get people to buy into, and a bit of an overview of where people should be focusing, so that at the end of the pilot or after ABM's kicked off, we can all have those conversations with those around us and CFOs and demonstrate we're making the right impact.
So I think there are probably two sets of indicators to look at, so both leading and lagging indicators. So, we've already spoken about the existing clients, so you should be seeing an uptick in retention and upsell. But from a leading indicators perspective, things like ad engagement, time on site from the target accounts, the number of stakeholders that you've got. So, if you think about the old world, if you got one really senior lead from a good fit company, you'd be like, great, hand it over to sales and expect them to close the sale. Actually, if it's ABM, you need to get that whole decision-making unit from that account involved. So actually measuring how many of those key decision makers you're influencing is a good leading indicator. And are they engaging with this? Are they coming to events? Are they responding to emails? Clicking on links in mails, etc., etc. So those can all be good leading indicators. Lagging indicators, I think you would be looking to measure things like, have you reduced the sales cycle? So the amount of time that it takes to close a sale. Is there a reduction in customer acquisition cost? And are you improving your close rate, i.e. are you winning more business? I think those are high level, kind of a good set of leading and lagging indicators to bear in mind as you're building out your program. Those last three from a lagging indicators perspective, that's what the C-suite cares about. And that's what helps you have the conversation about, this is not a marketing program. This is how we're going to impact the business.
Yeah, those are great. We are unfortunately out of time. We're slightly over time, but there's so much there and so much value that it was 100% worth it. I'm really, really grateful for you sharing so much insight, Jenna. I know you've seen ABM from so many different angles, as you alluded to at the start, and there's a lot of value in that. So lots of strategic, but also really useful tactical takeaways for people to think about getting started on the ABM journey or making a success of it. So I'm grateful for you sharing everything. Thanks again.
No, thanks so much for having me.